Hi, my name is Nathan Florsheim, and I am a photo and video instructor at the Evanston Art Center. Thanks to the Phillip and Edith Leonian Foundation, we are able to present you with a series of video tutorials to help you with your photography process at home. Now that we know how to import and organize our files using Adobe Bridge, let's go over how to edit our photos using Photoshop's Camera Raw. First of all, in order to get the full capabilities out of Camera Raw, you'll need to be shooting in the RAW format. This is something that you have to select in your camera's menu. Depending on what camera you're using, it may vary, but basically you'll need to go into your camera's settings and under File Format, you're going to change to RAW. Now we can navigate to our folder on Adobe Bridge. So we go to Photo 2020, Iceland, Fuji selections, and we can choose which photo we want to start editing with. This image is a great example of how Camera Raw can give us more flexibility in terms of editing than something like a JPEG file could. In this image, the left-hand side of the sky is very, very bright to the point of being blown out. If this were a JPEG, we wouldn't be able to have much flexibility of bringing anything back from that area and trying to see some detail of the sky. RAW files contain so much more information than a JPEG that we can actually bring some of the detail and information in those bright areas back. If Photoshop is the only editing software you have on your computer, RAW files should open automatically in it, but to ensure that it does, you can do Control or right-click and choose Open with Camera Raw. This is the Camera Raw editing window. There are a variety of different screens and options you can do, but most of what we're going to be doing takes place in this right side toolbar. Every camera and lens has some form of distortion occur when you take a picture. So the first thing I like to do with Camera Raw is go under Optics, and you can select Use Profile Corrections, where Camera Raw will understand what camera and lens you are using and apply a series of corrections to remove any distortion there. This menu also allows you to remove the chromatic aberration if it's present in images. This is when the edges of certain things in the image have a green or magenta outline. This doesn't always happen, but you can make sure that it won't happen with this option. A majority of the editing that we will be doing in Camera Raw will take place under the basic menu. This is where we can adjust things like the brightness and the contrast, but also where we can address the issue in the sky that we mentioned earlier, where we try and bring back some detail from those areas that are too bright. As you can see, there's a red blotch on my screen in the area of the sky that we were talking about earlier. This is something called clipping, where we can actually have Camera Raw notify us of any areas that are too bright or too dark that we need to address. To turn this on, we go to the top right-hand side of the window, and there is our histogram. On either side of the histogram is a little box. If we click on those so each one is highlighted in white, we know that our clipping is on. If there's an area that is too bright, it will turn red, and if there's an area that is too dark, it will turn blue. Next, we can start to address these problem areas by using the sliders below. Right now I'm using the whites and the highlight slider and playing with them until the red blotch goes away. And you can start to see some detail coming back in that area of the sky. If there were to be some areas that were too dark, there would be the blue, and I could address them by using the blacks and the shadows slider, just as I did with the highlights and the white slider. Next, we can address the white balance of our image, which are the upper two sliders labeled Temperature and Tint. Where it says White Balance as Shot, this will also contain a drop-down menu where you can do a variety of presets in Camera Raw. Once you make an adjustment to the slider, it will switch to Custom. White balance affects the overall tonal temperature of your image, and this is determined by the quality of light that you are shooting under. So if you're shooting indoors versus outdoors, that will impact the white balance. Ideally, with a good white balance, the whites of your image will look pure white. If it is off a little bit, it will be color cast with something like magenta, green, yellow, or blue. One of the benefits of shooting with Camera Raw is if your white balance is off in your camera, you can adjust it as much as you need afterwards by using the temperature and tint sliders. For example, if your image is too magenta, you would move that bottom slider towards the green area, and if it was too yellow, you would move the top slider towards the blue area. The sliders labeled Texture, Clarity, and Dehaze are three that I very rarely use. What these do is affect the sharpness or blurriness of your image, and very rarely do I have to do anything with those because oftentimes they don't do the best job. And if you do want to sharpen your image, you can do so in Photoshop manually, and that is what I would recommend. So we are going to skip that for now. Underneath, you see the Vibrance and Saturation sliders. These two are sliders that I do use semi-frequently, and what they do is impact the overall color saturation or strength in your image. The saturation slider is a general adjustment to the entire color spectrum in your image, while the Vibrance selectively impacts some of the less saturated colors in your image. You can use these sliders to either increase the color or decrease the color in your image. The final step in my raw editing process is cropping my image. This tool is located in the upper right-hand corner of the window. The crop tool in the raw editor gives you a variety of options for the aspect ratio. If you click on the drop-down menu, you can choose original, as shot, custom, or a variety of other ratios if you want to lock it to a set aspect ratio. Typically, I will use custom or original when I am cropping, so I can either have full control over the ratio or maintain the original aspect ratio of the image itself. You can also use the crop tool to make rotation adjustments if your image is a little bit angled or askew. You can do this by hovering your cursor on the outside borders of the image when you see your cursor turn into a curved arrow. Click and hold and you can rotate it to the left or the right. Once you are done cropping, you can hit the return key on your keyboard to exit the crop tool. This completes what I want to do for this image in Camera Raw, so I can either scroll to the bottom of the window and hit done, and that will save all my changes and exit out of the editor, or hit open, which will also save my changes, but open it up in Photoshop for any additional editing that I may like to do. That is all I will be covering in this video on Camera Raw. There is plenty of other tools you can use in the Raw editor. However, these are the ones that I use most frequently and consider to be basic and essential. I encourage you to play around with the other tools that weren't covered in this video to get more familiarized with the software, but I hope that this video serves as a helpful resource to get acquainted with Camera Raw. Once again, we would like to thank the Phillip and Edith Leonian Foundation for providing the funding to make these videos possible. Stay tuned for more videos covering Photoshop, other editing softwares, and camera tips and tricks. Thanks.